Where did our economy stand at the time of independence? Why was India called Sone Ki Chiriya? How did we go from 33% of the global economy to less than 3%? Why was 1991 such an important year for us? And what does the future hold? Welcome back to another video of our channel. And let us answer all of these questions and much more on our 78th Independence Day as we explore the past, present and future of this beast called the Indian economy. All the way from 180 to 1500 AD, India was the undisputed economic superpower of the world. We were the biggest economy. According to the Angus Madison estimate, our GDP was over 30% of the global gross domestic product. For the sake of comparison, the US GDP today is right around 25% of the global GDP. Back then, India was an exporting powerhouse, particularly for our agricultural produce, spices, perfumes, and medicine. This is precisely why we were called Sone Ki Chiriya. We had a minor decline thereafter caused by the Mughal invasions, which led to China overtaking us and we fall into rank 2, and our total contribution to the global GDP fell to 23%. But then came the colonial age, 19th century. Europe is said to have stolen 33.5% of the global GDP between 1870 and 1913. India and China were the most impacted, from being global superpowers to poverty-struck nations. At the time of independence, our GDP contribution to the global GDP was 4.2%. We were still the 6th largest economy, but then some policy missteps by the leadership then caused us to fall even further, and by 1980s, we were a mere 3% of the global GDP. We fell to rank 12. Now we can't entirely blame the Congress government back then for this. As a country who'd just been exploited for over a century by the West, we can't just go ahead and accept the supposedly Western economic model of capitalism, right? Even though Indians were capitalists involved in agriculture, architecture, and trading at a time when those in the West were barbarians playing with sticks and stones. Nevertheless, we ended up adopting the economic model of our bigger brother back then, Soviet Union's socialism. Taxes were high as 97.5%. Wealth creation was seen as a crime, and starting a business was almost impossible during the license Raj. RBI even had to sell our gold to bolster our depleting foreign reserves. But thankfully, in 1991, under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, we had our watershed moment: economic liberalization. Wealth creation, private enterprises, and foreign investments, which were previously frowned upon, were now encouraged. Industry started booming. Poverty rates fell from 60% in 1981 to 5% as of 2024. We went from 3% of global GDP to 4.3% in 2000. Today, we stand at 7.5%. By 2030, IMF predicts that we'll be at 9.2%, and Amitabh Kant, the CEO of Niti Aayog, predicts that we would be at 30% of the global GDP by 2040, back to the levels where we once stood as Sone Ki Chiriya. Enough about the past and the future. Now let's look at the present state of the Indian economy. The most important thing to look at is workforce distribution. Workforce distribution in primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. Economics 101 recap. Primary sector involves agriculture, mining, fishing, animal husbandry, etc. Secondary is mostly manufacturing, and tertiary is service sector such as hospitality, IT, banking, and more. In advanced economies such as the US, less than 2% of the workforce is involved in the primary sector, about 20% in manufacturing, and right around 80% in the service sector. In middle income countries like China, 22% of the workforce today is involved in the primary sector, down from nearly 40% in the 2000s. 30% is in manufacturing and nearly 50% in the service sector. In India, even today, over 40% of the country's population is involved in the primary sector. While this might look really bad, it has gotten better over time. In the 2000s, we were at over 50%. The problem with this is that while 40% of the country's population is involved in the primary sector, this sector contributes only 20% to the country's GDP, which means that a much bigger population is fighting for a much smaller share of the pie. On the other hand, 26% of our population is into manufacturing and 32% in the service sector, while they contribute 30% and 50% to our GDP respectively. Now, as bad as the situation really is with our primary sector, it's quite the opposite with our service sector. We are an exporting powerhouse when it comes to services, primarily on the backs of our IT industry and our BPOs, which is business process outsourcing companies. India has become the back office of the world. Our total service exports sit at $400 billion per annum as of today, and they're expected to grow to over $800 billion according to Goldman Sachs by 2030. One area, however, where we've not performed as well as we should have is manufacturing. We have not been able to capitalize on our biggest advantage, a young, cheap, and skilled labor force, primarily because of a dreadful set of policies. Here is what late Charlie Munger said about the same.
India is grossly defective because they've taken the worst aspects of our culture, allowing a bunch of idiots to scream and stop everything, and they copied it. And so they've taken the worst aspects of democracy, and then they forged their own chains and put them on. It's hard to get anything done in India, and the bribes are just awful.
As bad as this sounds, things really are getting better. As a result of recent policy developments, primarily the PLI scheme or Production Linked Incentive Scheme under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, we have made some significant progress in manufacturing. For instance, 14% of all the iPhones now are made in India, and this number is likely to touch 25% by 2028. Automobile and automotive parts manufacturing in India has also gone up. In fact, India's manufacturing growth has hit a 16-year high as a result of the PLI scheme. However, we are not even close to realizing our full capability and potential as a manufacturing destination. And hopefully, we will be making a lot more progress in the coming years. Do you remember Amitabh Kant's prediction that I stated in the middle of the video? Well, I have another prediction to make. By the time we celebrate 100 years of independence in 2047, I believe India would be the biggest economy in the world, right where we belong, at the top. What do you think about my prediction, this video, and the great Indian economy? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, I have a little announcement. From next week, on every Friday, we would be posting business case studies on this channel. So do subscribe and hit on the notification bell to stay tuned. Jai Hind.